Hey, welcome to Real People. Stephanie Allensworth here, again with Michael Shan. We're doing part two of the history of propaganda. And just love to talk to this guy. He's got so much information. So, Michael, welcome. Thanks for being here again.
Thanks for having me, Stephanie.
So, we're going to start with some topics of uh, I think we're going to the past. We're going to talk about some war things, or I'm just going to let you take it away.
Okay. Um, Although we're going to touch on a bunch of historical events, I think the one thing I could probably share with people that could be of value is how do you know which side is telling the truth? How do you find the truth when you're hearing both sides and you don't have time to research? You're busy with your life and your family and your job, and you don't have time to read all the books, and you don't exactly know what to believe. And so the one thing I found in, 20 plus years of looking for people who are telling the truth is the whistleblowers and the people telling the truth, they do believe that you should generally be honest in life. That's kind of their outlook. Now, we most of us think that everybody thinks that way, especially in the Midwest and certain places we have a certain set of values. Not that the coasts don't, but I grew up in the Midwest with a certain set of values, and people are honest and wholesome, and we assume everybody else is going to be honest. However, when we look at the arguments that are made by propagandists, it's not just that they're willing to lie a little bit. They don't have any regard for the truth at all. It's really just about the outcome. Even when they
Hmm.
get caught in a lie almost immediately, if the lie served the purpose they wanted it to serve, if they wanted it to leave an impression on the public so that they think about things in a certain way, even if they get found out right away, they're okay with it. They really don't have regard for the truth. And we hear now, in this last few years, we have some great speakers coming out, not just speakers, specialists, intelligence professionals, and they're all saying the same thing. They're just amazed at how untruthful a lot of these spokespeople for the government or for certain interests are. And we're seeing so much of that. So the things that I would say, um, like in a debate, if you look back at Roman times or Greek times when there would be a debate, you would try and debate and defend your position based on the merits of your position. And you're going back and forth. And in those times, it was widely recognized that if one of the people started to engage in ad hominem attacks, means character attacks on the other individual, it was kind of a tacit admission that he'd lost. And he was just saying, okay, you know, like for example, the other guy has made very solid points and he can't defend any of these points. It's clear the audience is leaning in the favor of the other guy. And then finally, the person just says, well, he's unfaithful to his wife and he's not a good man. And why would you believe him anyway? If they
That
do
sounds about
something,
right.
so an educated audience, like at that time, they would all kind of chuckle because they realized that the guy essentially lost, and that was just his last kind of way of putting the guy down. So we call it ad hominem attacks, character attacks.
Mhm.
That's what they start with these days on television, in media, is they'll immediately start smearing people and they won't even debate based on their position and the merits of their position. They go straight to the smears. And actually, unfortunately, with a television watching audience who doesn't understand that they're avoiding the issue, they're just smearing the other side, we should be catching that, but most people aren't. So in this day and age, they go straight to the smears. They get really nasty.
Mhm.
So the back to trying to decide which side to believe, the people that I've watched who are good researchers, they're careful, they're methodical, they're trying to be as precise as possible when they're sharing information. If they make a mistake, they'll come back and correct. They'll say, I'm sorry, I was mistaken about that. I realized that someone alerted me to my mistake, and this is the truth on the issue. I've never seen them lie, like an outright lie. And they generally ask for debate. They say, please, somebody debate me. Let's get out on the public forum. Now, the flip side, the side that generally is the establishment side or the side that is willing to deceive and use propaganda, they use smears. They use highly emotional language. Instead of like making a good argument, they'll make one point, and then if you don't agree with them, then they say, "Oh, well, you're just a racist, or you're just hateful, or you just you just don't care about other people." Like on the global warming issue, oh, you just don't care about the planet. You probably just think it's okay to pollute. No, if I'm presenting the other side, that doesn't mean I think any of those things. But that kind of emotional language, it's like, no, let's sit down and have a real conversation without all the attacks. Quick to label people. If you take a different position, like if you say that, hey, maybe Russia has interests. Every country has interests. America, we're always talking about American interests. We're going to get the oil in a country, or we say we're defending democracy, or we have strategic interests. Well, let's say, well, maybe Russia has interests. Oh, you're a Putin apologist, or oh, you're a Putin. Okay, why can't we just have a reasonable conversation? That's what they do. So they go to the smears, judging and labeling you. Another thing they do is they'll completely misrepresent what you say. Now, and so this is not me defending Trump. I see all Trump's failings, but Trump made a comment about it was something about a if he doesn't get elected president, the economy is going to take a hit and they'll be hell to pay. He wasn't talking about, I'm going to make everybody suffer. He's saying, if something isn't done about this, economically, there will be hell to pay. If Trump is so bad, as everybody says he is, why can't they just quote him properly in the proper context and explain what he said? But instead, they start fabricating these things and say, oh, Trump says if he's not going to get elected, that there's going to be hell to pay. Okay, that's a misrepresentation.
Hmm.
If your position is so strong, why do you have if you say X and if my position is so strong, why do I have to take X, whatever you said, and then distort it and twist it and make it so much worse if I can really just win the argument on my own position? And we see those types of distortions all the time. And again, the people that are the whistleblowers and the people that are trying to tell the truth and trying to convey this to the public, they're very careful about being accurate. There was a great professor. He was Hoover Institute at Stanford University years ago. This was in the 70s. His name was Anthony Sutton. He wrote many books. And one of the books he wrote was, I forget the title exactly, but it was basically Soviet technological development and uh, American financing. And basically, it turned out that from 1917 all the way up to 1991, American oligarchs were providing financial and technological assistance to the Soviet Union that whole time. Now, he knew that this was so controversial that they would do everything they could to smear him. So his book is just detailed and footnoted, and they knew exactly how many tanks, how much technology was given to the Soviets during that whole time. And he had to detail it meticulously, provide all the information so that they couldn't smear and slander. And he said in a talk, he said, we don't have that same allowance or latitude to make mistakes. The establishment, they can lie constantly. And we keep on coming back to them because we trust them, because they're the government. And we just assume that nobody lies like that. But when you are trying to go against the narrative, if you're trying to go against the establishment, you could be 99% accurate. And if you say one thing wrong, they're going to amplify it. They're going to repeat it over and over and over, and they're going to just smear you and make you look like you not reputable at all. And Sutton knew that, which was why he was so careful with his research. So I guess I'm going on a little bit, but with the other side, with a particular issue, and for example, as a quick example, let me talk about global warming.
Okay.
Okay, so with the global warming issue, even if you don't know both sides, and again, this is not me thinking people should pollute or anything like that, or that we don't care about the planet. That's silly. But we have numerous examples of the other side lying, flat out lies, or leaving out context, or not acknowledging something where it's already been corrected. So, for example, Al Gore showed that famous hockey stick curve, where the curve is going like this and then it goes up.
Right.
Researchers out of Canada showed that it didn't matter what data you used because of the nature of the formula itself. Any data plugged in is going to create that kind of a curve. It simply wasn't reliable information. It wasn't a reliable calculation. They said oceans were going to rise a certain number of feet by a certain date. Well, here we are, and they have it. So they're trying to make predictions. Their predictions don't work. They're using fear to try and coerce us. There was Climate Gate. So if you know about Climate Gate, basically what happened, the Goddard Space Center had these temperature stations all around the globe. And the scientists were openly increasing temperatures a few degrees so that it would suit their theory about what was happening. They were actually just fudging the data. They were increasing the temperatures.
That's the scientific method.
And, and they got caught doing it. And they don't apologize. They won't debate the issue. So the argument again is, well, any debate would just give legitimacy to the other side, and there is no legitimacy to the other side. There is no other side. The issue has been settled. The science has been settled. We've heard that before. That's what they
Mm-hmm.
say. You've got really good scientists who are basically saying very carefully, they're saying, here's what we think is happening to try and base global warming on one element, carbon dioxide, and to not acknowledge all the other factors that affect the climate. Climate is very, very complex. One of the very good people is an MIT professor, Richard Lindzen. Lindzen is professor of atmospheric sciences. He said carbon dioxide is a very small part of what makes a climate function. He and others have been asking for a debate. The other side won't debate at all. So, and again, the reason they don't debate is there's no upside for if everybody's already kind of in your camp and they believe what you're saying, you can only lose. They're not going to bring any more people over to the global warming side. Information is going to come out, arguments are going to come out. It's going to hurt their movement, so there's no upside. They're just going to avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they label opponents as deniers, climate deniers. Okay, that's a smear. When you call someone a denier, it means they're denying reality. They're denying an obvious reality. And so that just means they're irrational. Calling them unscientific. Most people don't know that there are, at least a few years ago, there were over 32,000 scientists who'd signed on and said, we have real issues with the global warming narrative as it exists now. We don't think it's just carbon dioxide, and to say that it's all human caused and humans are the problem on the planet, we don't agree with that. So again, there is another side. There are good arguments, and they're not all funded by the oil industry. That's the first conclusion people jump to. Oh, they must be funded by oil. But no, there are good documentaries on the subject. People don't understand that the scientists themselves turn over their conclusions to a panel of bureaucrats. And those bureaucrats then changed what the scientists said. This happened with that first IPCC conference. The scientists, there were only a couple of papers on global warming. And the scientists said, seems like there may be some global warming, impossible to determine a cause at this time. That was the conclusion of the scientists, according to Richard Lindzen, as he describes, because he was at the conference. Then they turned that over to some bureaucrats, and the bureaucrats said, there is definitely global warming, and it seems likely that it's human caused. So they changed the conclusions. And then
Mm-hmm.
they tell the public, IPCC, oh, that's an organization of 2,500 scientists. That's what they said. No, this is somebody setting policy, and they're distorting things, and they're lying. And we catch them lying again and again and again. So I'm not trying to convince people how to believe on the global warming thing or what to believe on the global warming issue. But if you really do a little research and you are trying to figure out who's being dishonest, how are they being dishonest, it helps you kind of find the right side of an issue or find the truth about an issue. So I know the purpose of
Yeah.
our talk today is not to talk about global warming, but we have I've got 15 points I could make that show that the other side has just we've caught them. We've caught them lying repeatedly. And they have no shame about lying because the narrative keeps on rolling. And they know that only a small percentage of people are ever going to pay attention. So they just stick with their narrative and they keep on hammering it in.
Yeah, I kind of believe that that is something that's just going away now. I mean, they're going to just move on to the next thing because all of these, all of these things that keep happening at one after another, all of these, let's call them trauma events or planned events that they've been working on. I mean, they've got them on a schedule. I've seen the schedule. I mean, they're happening exactly as they planned them. And so this one's going out. They can't get any traction on it. there's some of the ridiculous things that you hear them say, like, saying trees are the problem or cow farts are the problem. And, let's get rid of the trees. We got to get rid of the cows. We got to give them, they're giving them some injection to, I, don't, I heard somebody say that was a scientist that said cows can't even fart. They've got four stomachs. They don't they don't exude gas. If they exude anything, it's going to be or excrete anything, it's going to be methane and not CO2. So it's just kind of a dying thing that they're clinging on to. This is just my opinion, by the way. So and this is just for entertainment value only. But I mean, I watch what they're saying and I hear the ridiculous things that they're coming up with, and they want to charge us for it. See, it all goes back to money. Now money is going to solve it. If they charge us for our carbon footprint, then they can make more money off of us. It's like you keep bleeding that turnip.
Sure.
Anyway, that's my opinion.
But again, leaving out the context, leaving out really significant testimony, again, is one of the dishonest ways people argue. And so
Mm,
one of the outspoken people was Patrick Moore, co-founder of Greenpeace, who at a certain point left Greenpeace and he saw that the organization basically had become an organization of eco-terrorists who felt that humans were a virus on the planet.
yeah.
And and that was, at least that was the way they started to act. And so Moore said that if you look at what they're trying to do, it's going to cost, hundreds of billions or even trillions of dollars to switch everything over in such a short period of time. It's going to be way too expensive for some of the less developed countries. And it's going to lock the pecking order in place. So more developed countries can afford to use some of these new green technologies. The less developed countries, they're going to have to take loans or they're going to have to make deals in order to get wind farms and certain types of green technologies and things like that. And this comes back to Confessions of an Economic Hitman, where you tell these countries they need to do something that they can't really afford to do. And now they're locked in a debt cycle where they're
Mm,
having to pay back these countries. So what Moore said was this is basically an agenda to tell countries whether or not they can develop their resources and how they can develop their resources. So a less developed country might not ever get to develop like an industrial based economy where they're manufacturing things because they don't have a cheap form of energy. And
well,
so there's very much an anti-human agenda. It's very much about controlling populations and controlling energy use. We've got books on the subject that show that this agenda is about 100 years old, where they thought that they could use the environment and use that as a basis for controlling populations. And if you're going to have a world governing body, it needs to have a revenue stream. Because again, just like to have any government, you need to have taxes or revenue of some kind, helping that government pay its employees and do what it needs to do. Well, if they give that UN body, they want to basically have a worldwide carbon tax that just for you being a human on this planet, producing some carbon and exhaling carbon dioxide, they would like to be able to tax you. And so if there's a world tax, that tax would then fund this large UN organization that gets to tell people how they live. And again, this comes back
exactly.
to 15-minute cities and electric cars. I mean, again, the electric car issue. Um, they're telling people they need electric cars, but an electrical grid is very vulnerable. And
Yeah.
so Gavin Newsom at a certain point told people that, well, because we're having some rolling power outages, we ask that you not charge your cars. Okay, so we're acting like this is the right way to go, but we make ourselves increasingly vulnerable.
Yeah.
On the cutting down trees thing, there was a Michael Moore documentary called Planet of the Humans. Now, Michael Moore was not the narrator in the documentary like he usually is, but I think he helped produce it. This came out in April 2020, right at the start of COVID. And he took so much heat for that documentary
Mm,
because the green movement was just livid that he told this story. And one of the things they were talking about was biomass. So biomass was the idea that you're cutting down trees, burning them, converting that heat to electricity, sending that electricity down the power lines, and then those people are then converting it back to some kind of energy they can use in the home to heat their home. Wouldn't it be better? We're told that we shouldn't be using firewood in the home or wood burning stoves, or we shouldn't even use propane stoves. We should use electrical everything. But with each conversion of energy from fire to heat into electricity, there's energy loss at every conversion.
Mhm.
And so the idea that we're going to cut down trees to produce electricity because we're going to burn them all, that's insane. And when you watch
Yeah,
these documentaries, you realize that there's so much about this agenda that doesn't work. And that's why, people were upset with Michael Moore because it told parts of that global warming movement and the companies and the interests that benefit. It didn't portray them in a positive light.
I haven't seen that documentary. I'm going to watch it.
Planet of the Humans. It was
Yeah,
on YouTube at the time. It was good.
I'll find it. I've liked some of his stuff. Um, when he's, like Sicko and, exposing how our food is and, so anyway, moving on.
Yeah, I
Can
don't.
I just say one thing though about the green energy, the one that I really, really don't like, and I think people are starting to catch on to it. Like, excuse me, the big wind farms. I have actually seen the uh, the big turbines there killing birds right in front of my face, like an eagle, you know, right into one of those propellers and watching it go. And I was just driving along recently. There's a school that has its own wind machine, and and I saw birds flying close to it, and I'm like, I do not want to witness this again. And sure enough, those birds flew right into those blades and got hacked down. And it made me so angry. I wanted to go up to the school and ask them, how many dead birds do you have on the ground every day after you turn this thing off? It's just insane. They're doing one thing that they think is good, but for me, killing the birds, just even one bird is too many for me. So I am not a fan of that. And I
Yeah,
apologize to anybody out there that's working for this, for my view on it. But you've got to know that's happening. Even our tribe down here at Mystic Lake Casino, they took theirs down because they're very fond of their eagles, and eagles were very prominent around there. And I'm sure that when they noticed that it was killing them, they took it down.
yeah.
It's a good thing. So anyway, I had to get that off my chest because
And
I
and
know
I
it's a green energy, but
and I know that we weren't going to talk about global warming the whole time. I was just using it as this
I
example
know.
of the way they make these arguments. And if you even just try and say, hey, there's another side, you
Mhm.
immediately get smeared. You don't care about, the future of our young people. You're being selfish. I mean, all these different ways that they label you, and you just can't even get people to look at facts. They
Yeah.
just refuse to believe it because they've heard it again. This is how propaganda works. We've been hearing global warming pretty much since I want to say 2006. Was that when Al Gore's documentary came out?
I don't remember, but yeah, the inconvenient truth.
So here we are 18 years into hearing it again and again and again, and especially young people who are hearing about it at age 3, 4, and 5. Well, now they're in their early 20s and they all think they need to get into environmental sciences because that's all they've heard their entire lives.
Yeah.
And based on what we're seeing now with wars and economies and or at least looming wars, what looks like is going to be a war, in escalation, homelessness, unemployment, just this massive suffering, everything else. I don't consider the global warming issue to even be in the top 10 issues
You need to.
that should be of concern for most people if we're looking at the future of humanity. I don't put it
Mm.
in the top. It's not, Greta Thunberg was saying that, things were going to be terrible by now. And again, none of the predictions are accurate. I'm certainly not advocating pollution, but the amount of cost and the amount of emphasis put on it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And thank you for all that because I think that's important. And being able to discern the truth and how to tell when, like the personal attacks are when you know that somebody's defending their side by using tactics instead of truth.
Yeah. and again, like when I referenced the MIT professor, Richard Lindzen, he's not the only one. There was Freeman Dyson, who was a Nobel, I think he was a Nobel Prize winner. He was at least a candidate, but I think he won the Nobel Prize. I mean, you have really good scientists saying there's more to all this. And I tell
Hmm.
this person, I say, you should listen to this person. Oh, he's probably funded by oil and coal. With zero research, zero willingness to listen to what he's saying, his arguments, just dismiss him out of hand. Or I would
Yeah.
say, or I would say, hey, there are some very good books that kind of explain this and look at both sides of the issue. Oh, anybody can write a book. I had someone say that to me. That was their response. Oh, anybody can write a book. I say, yes, but books have sources and that's how we come to an understanding. And a lot of people feel that they already have a sufficient understanding and they don't need to change their mind. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's kind of intellectual laziness. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it is actually. Yeah. Yeah. If
Easy.
you
It's easier to keep on thinking what you already think than to change your mind about something. Changing your mind isn't all that easy.
that's the real inconvenient truth.
Well, should I go through some history?
Yes, let's dive into some of that fun stuff.
Okay. Okay. So for the listeners, I won't go into great detail on each event, and I'll provide sources for some of these things. But there are hardly any major world events that we can think of, any of the big events of the last 250 years, where we have a proper understanding of it. There were always other things happening. The public was given one explanation, but something very different happened. So, the Revolutionary War. The Revolutionary War was not really about taxes. You know, the Boston Tea Party, and of course the
Mhm.
whole idea, or the idea that taxes were the reason. The issue, and this was according to Benjamin Franklin, the main reason was that the UK, the British Empire, took away the money supply, or basically um, made it impossible for the colonies to use the money supply they were using. They were printing colonial scrip, which was basically just a means of exchange. Again, you don't have to use something that's gold backed. I mean, there have been some cultures that used shells. As long as everyone
Mhm.
agrees that this can be money, that's what we'll trade with. That's how we have some means of exchange. In
Mhm.
Britain, basically 12th century Britain, they used what was called a tally stick. And it was just a stick issued by the king that they would notch it, and the number of notches would basically assign a value to it, and then that stick could be exchanged. So as long as everyone agrees on it, you can use anything. The colonies were using colonial script, and when Britain found out about this, they didn't outlaw it, but they basically took some steps that made it so that they couldn't really use the colonial script effectively. So all of a sudden, the colonies no longer had a working money supply, and it created terrible hardship. And so that suffering deliberately created by Britain was the primary reason from the Revolutionary War. The tax on tea was insignificant. And this was according to Benjamin Franklin, and this was well covered in the documentary I mentioned before, The Money Masters.
Mhm.
Um, Another event, War of 1812. Most people can't give a good explanation for the War of 1812. So here we are, um, 40, 35 years after the Revolutionary War. Okay, why the War of 1812? Well, it came down to a banking charter. And I mentioned this in our last talk. The first Bank of the United States was founded in 1792. The charter was to come due in 1812, 20 years later. And the Americans at that point, founding fathers, realized that they shouldn't be borrowing money from a bank that was largely owned by European banking interests. They should run their own money supply. And when they did not want to renew the charter, Britain, with the full backing of Nathan Rothschild, a big banker there, basically said, we're going to teach these arrogant Americans a lesson. So they attacked America in order to get the charter renewed. And the charter did get renewed.
Yeah.
Most people have no idea what the War of 1812 was about, or they've just heard something different. It was really about a banking charter. It was about money.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
amazing, isn't it? That the spin.
right, right. Um,
Or just if nobody if I don't remember ever being told what it was about in school.
we don't hear any of these things.
Yeah.
And again, most of these things, at least about money and banking, you'll get almost all of that from that documentary, The Money Masters. They give you this whole history,
Mhm.
and you realize that the banking powers have been had their own motivations for doing things, and things have been happening in a very different way than most people realize. I
Yeah.
mean, one 3.5 hour documentary could, drastically alter your worldview. But again, most people don't know about these things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Nobody researches anymore, It's,
yeah, not much, not much. Or we think we have a sufficient understanding because we got an education and we have a job and we're able to pay our bills and take care of our family, and that's enough. That's kind of the attitude some people have. They don't really see, well, why do I need to know the truth here? And my
well, go ahead.
my argument is you need some truth to make good decisions in life, to understand what's going on, to know some historical context so you can understand what's happening now. Um, and without
Well,
that, yes,
and if we don't know what's happening now and we don't educate ourselves enough to know how to stop it, we are going down the tubes. If we don't wake up and find the truth and start standing up for ourselves, we're going to go right down the drain. And you know, hopefully things are going to change here real soon. But uh, I have to see it. I hope to see it. Anyway, I'll be the color person in all this.
okay, good.
Okay.
Um, Andrew Jackson's presidency. Okay, and again, there are a lot of things to say about Andrew Jackson. His policy against the Native Americans was terrible. But at least
Mm,
with regards to the banks, he really wanted to break the bank. Break the bank, meaning the second bank of the United States and its control over America in nearly every aspect, its control over politics. He saw its negative influence. So the first thing he did was fired about 30% of government employees because they all had conflicts of interest and strong ties with the bank.
mm,
Um, and then he basically said he wasn't going to renew their charter. And that second bank of the United States and its president, his name was Nicholas Biddle, Biddle. Biddle sat in his, top, in his office, in his lavish office, and basically said, "We're going to crash the economy, and we're going to blame it on Jackson. We're going to make him take." So they had control of the newspapers, and the newspapers were really going after him. And they tried to assassinate Andrew Jackson. The assassin came at him, and I believe the assassin had two guns. Both of the guns misfired, and Andrew Jackson basically took his cane and like beat the guy up with his cane. But again, it was one of the first assassination attempts engineered by the banks because he
yeah,
would.
history repeats itself.
Yeah. We forward to the Civil War. So the Civil War, I talked about this in the last talk as well. Um, you had financial interests trying to break away to fracture the Union of the United States. And you had Freemasonry playing a very strong role in the South. And they had influenced enough of the Southerners and planted some bad ideas in their heads that they needed to break away. This is not me saying the South is wrong or the South didn't have an argument to make. Actually, they did. The South was quite concerned because um, the industrial base was dominating politics, and there were more people in the North than there were in the South. And so basically, the industrial economy was trying to squash the agricultural economy, or at least exert more political influence. And in
Mm,
their agricultural economy in the South, they had issues with that. They wanted some kind of equal representation. And so they were seeing that they had less and less influence in DC. Um, and they were considering that they needed to break away from the Union. And it wasn't really about slavery at that point. It was really, Lincoln said that if he could not free a slave and keep the Union intact, he would. Now, within a few years, they started to say that slavery was also a primary, reason for people to fight the Civil War, and it was kind of a recruiting tool as well. And I certainly understand the moral argument, of course, anybody would. But that was not the primary reason for the Civil War. It was
I'm thinking it was a cover up.
you basically had factions. You had northern bankers closely tied to Britain, and then you had the South, which was largely funded by French bankers, and the banks were funding both sides of the conflict. And then another piece of history most people don't know is there was a discussion within Britain that maybe when America was sufficiently weak during the Civil War, that the North would position itself in, or the, excuse me, Britain would position itself in Canada on the border, and the French would position themselves in Mexico, specifically Veracruz. I think there was some kind of a base there. And when America was sufficiently weak, they would bring their troops into America and try and fracture America even more, take advantage of America's weakness. So this was at least a discussion. Now, I don't think troops are ever positioned there. I don't know that piece of history. But what happened in response was the Tsar of Russia said, we don't want America being broken up due to British and French influence. So we're going to send assistance. So the Russian Tsar actually sent a fleet of a Navy fleet, and they came into New York Harbor and they came into San Francisco Harbor. And they basically said, Brits and French need to stay out. We're not going to get involved, but we're also going to make sure nobody else can get involved. So we're going to protect America and let America fight this one out on its own. And
I had not heard that.
yeah, most people don't know that story. So as late as 1900, there were still parades acknowledging the Russian assistance to America, keeping America intact and making sure America wasn't fractured further by Britain and France meddling.
Hmm.
And so this piece of
Wow.
history is covered very well by a historian named Webster Tarpley. He did a podcast in which he gave all the details, and you could even find the newspaper headlines at the time, where he basically, Tsar, we owed a debt of gratitude to the Tsar because he helped.
Oh wow.
Pieces of history
Uh,
nobody
which czar was that?
knows. I don't know. Um, I don't think it was Alexander. I'm sorry, I don't know.
Nicholas the First, maybe? Or
Maybe, I'm not sure.
okay. All right, just wondering. All right, keep going.
Um, let's forward about 50 years. So um, the sequel to that movie, The Money Masters, was called The Secret of Oz. Oz as in the Wizard of Oz. And the author of The Wizard of Oz wrote that play as an allegory about what was really happening. So the yellow brick road was a reference to gold and being on a gold standard. There were a number of different references, and so basically in this documentary, The Secret of Oz, which is basically the second installment of The Money Masters, they show that the author of that book, which later became, the famous movie, they were talking about what was happening from 1860 all the way up through about 1910, and this battle for what money could be. A lot of people said we should have silver. Silver should be lawful coinage, and there was enough silver that it would be plentiful, and you would have plenty of liquidity in the system. And the people that wanted to control things restricted the money supply significantly and said we could only be on gold. But it created
Hmm.
hardship. And so the reason most people don't know very much about that period of time from 1865 to say 1910 is because it was a time of significant hardship financially in America, and it was deliberately caused.
As usual.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah, there's a lot to the Wizard of Oz there. I've heard, when they break it down and kind of make the connections, that it's pretty interesting. But yeah, we'll just keep moving on because I know we got more to cover.
yeah. Okay, the founding of the Federal Reserve. Most
Mhm.
people don't know the story of the founding of the Federal Reserve. It was very well covered in a book called Secrets of the Federal Reserve by Eustace Mullins,
Mhm.
Mull, Eustace. Eustace Mullins, that was a big research project for him. And the Americans were concerned that the idea of an American central bank, they were concerned that it was going to be run by a bunch of private bankers and that it was going to further impoverish America. And so a senator named Vanderlip, no, I could be wrong about that. I'm sorry. I think Vanderlip was a banker. The senator was, the name's not coming to me right at the moment.
That's okay.
But a few senators, along with bankers, went to Jekyll Island, which I believe is off of the Carolinas, but I could be wrong about that. They were very secretive about all of it. And the bankers essentially wrote this bill, but they needed to call the Fed. They needed to make it seem like it was a government agency, not an agency of private bankers. So they gave it a deceptive name, the
Hmm.
Fed, the Federal Reserve. The way they finally passed it, because there was a lot of resistance, the way they finally passed it was right before the Christmas holiday, when a number of members of Congress were supposed to be a harsh winter, and a number of members of Congress adjourned and went home a little early. And with not everybody in attendance, they secretly kind of said, "Hey, those of you who are in favor of this bill, stick around." And they had a vote with not everybody there, and they pushed. Once they had
Yeah.
The Fed was now could print money as needed, and so having the Fed was a significant contributor to sparking World War One. Because most countries are not going to enter into a world war if they don't know how they're going to pay for it. And the Federal Reserve was willing to provide loans to all these different countries, and so all of a sudden, it's like the banker in Monopoly. If the banker says, "Hey, I'll
Yeah.
give you as much as you want, everybody go ahead and have a ball," that was kind of what they did. So the creation of the Fed is very closely tied to the start of World War
Hmm. Yeah, and it's neither a reserve or has any. There's no gold. There's no reserve. It's
It's
just a
not
bunch
federal.
of, and it's not federal. And the IRS is attached to them. Yeah, it's, the IRS is not also, it's not a government institution. It's a privatized company, right? And do they align with the Federal Reserve, or does that money go somewhere else?
I don't know all of that. I mean, I put it this way, I try and stick to what I can provide a resource for or a clear
Mm.
source. I've understood that either the Department of Treasury or the IRS might even be based out of the country, like in Puerto Rico or something like
Puerto
that.
Rico it is. Yep. Hmm.
I've heard these types of things before. I haven't verified it for myself. So if
Yeah.
a person really, and there are books that cover this, I don't recall exactly, but it's
Yeah.
not as clear and straightforward as people think. And if a
Yeah.
person were to research this, there would be some surprises. People would be a little
Yeah.
shocked that it works the way it does.
Actually, I think when Trump was president the first time, he he forced the IRS to actually come under the U.S. Treasury, so it would be controlled by the government. I can't prove that right at the moment, but that's something that I think I'll look up and research further.
I doubt they would have let him do that, and I don't know that he had the authority to.
Hmm.
Uh, that's something we should look into. Again,
Yeah.
most people think the president has a certain, I mean, unlimited powers, or not unlimited, but significant powers. But if you're going against the vested interests, the entrenched interests, they can really mess with you. And this was
And they
again,
do.
this was again what like Senator Chuck Schumer said to Trump at one point. He goes, I can't believe you would go against these people. They got 6 ways to Sunday that they can get you.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
when you're playing along, they'll let you adjust some things, as the expression goes, adjust the deck chairs on the Titanic a little bit. You can fiddle with some little things, but the idea that you're going to fundamentally change the government or something like that, I look into that one. That
Yeah,
idea
I will.
had the IRS, I'm not sure. And even if he did, if they let him do it, well, then I have to think that maybe it served them in some way. If he was really no going against the financial interest or doing something that they did not approve of, I can't imagine they let him get away with it.
Well, they don't approve of anything he does, which is why they hate him so much. You know, they.
I wouldn't argue that. Like if we look, I mean, the media acts like they hate him, but um, he's great for ratings. I mean, in a sense, the media knows he's a cash cow because
Yeah.
people are looking to the news and to the newspaper every day. What Trump do today? What Trump do today?
Mm,
So
mm.
Trump's saying that he was going to bring down the deep state. Well, if you look at his nominees so far, just in since from the election to now, it's all people that are going acting in complete opposition to the things he campaigned on.
Yep.
they're escalating things. They're saying very inflammatory things. They're war hawks. They're neocons. His picks are terrible, and you have very good and intelligent people pointing out that this is really concerning. Now, this is not me being, a Biden-Harris supporter. It's just we need to make sure that we're still paying close attention. We're not giving somebody a pass. You know,
Well, exactly.
Trump had a very
Exactly.
Trump had a very populist message through the campaign cycle. But then if you look at his picks now, anybody, like, for example, one organization that a person can look to, this is a very important organization, VIPS, Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. Great name,
Mm.
VIPS. It is former CIA analysts, former military intelligence people. And many of those, they've been, one of the best resources right now, I find, is Judge Napolitano. He used to be on Fox News. He's got his own BitChute channel. It's called Judging Freedom. He interviews two colonels, two lieutenant colonels, former UN weapons inspector Scott Ritter, three CIA analysts, former ambassador, former diplomat, State Department official, two really good journalists. They're all honest. They're all telling this story. And every single one of them looks at this and just says, we are absolutely amazed that Trump is choosing these people. Either either he was lying or he didn't throughout the campaign cycle, or he didn't learn anything from his first presidency, from his first term. There's
Well,
there's a chance that there's some other move happening here. And so if he sticks with these candidates, it calls Trump into question in a really significant way. If on January 20th something else happens, once he's in office, okay, maybe it was part of a larger strategy. But him choosing some of these people, they're saying terribly inflammatory things. They're all basically saying we need to be focused on the strategic defeat of Russia. That's not the way you de-escalate. That's not the way you get out of a war.
yeah, yeah. Uh, I definitely don't agree with that. Uh, I, I kind of wonder if he doesn't have, every time he kind of exposes somebody, have you noticed when he puts somebody in the spotlight, it's almost like under the heat lamp, shining a light on them, they end up being exposed for something. And I don't know, I guess I have to feel like I felt last time. Let's wait and see what happens. I mean, even with Biden and Harris, I was like, well, let's see what happens. I wasn't screaming in people's faces or anything. It's like, yeah, okay, let's just see what happens. Well, then we saw what happened.
Yeah, again, I haven't written him off, and I mean we're hoping for the best. We
Yeah.
hope we hope that there's some kind of a strategy here, but the things that these people are saying, I mean, again, there was a military Buchanan. I think he was a rear admiral, and at a certain point, in response to Russia saying you cannot use these ATACMS missiles, you cannot. The reason the ATACMS missiles are different than any of the other weaponry we've given to Ukraine is that they have to be fired by American servicemen using American intelligence, American satellites, American radar. So essentially,
Oh,
the Ukrainians can push the button to fire the missile, but everything about the missile's operation needs to be done by the Americans. So that's essentially America being involved. And,
exactly.
and Russia said this is a red line. You're now involved in the conflict. This is different. This is not you
Yeah.
just selling or giving them some weapons. In
That
response,
I did not know. Okay.
Russia said it was a red line. Russia then responded with the Oreshnik missile, which is a very different thing, and that's a whole conversation in itself. A game changer. It's a very different technology.
Hmm.
And this Rear Admiral Buchanan said that, well, America has considered if there is some kind of a nuclear conflict, we think that we could survive the nuclear conflict, and even coming out of the nuclear conflict, we would still have the strategic advantage. We've war gamed this, and we think that we could survive nuclear conflict. Why in the world you have people saying things like that. Now, technically, that's not a Trump appointee. That's someone in the deep state, someone in the administration. But Trump's appointees are saying things that are very similar to that. They're saying very inflammatory things.
Yeah, I don't think a nuclear conflict is, viable. I
No, no,
it's like we all have to live on this planet. We're all still here. I don't have an underground bunker to go to, stocked with food. So, uh, and that stuff just doesn't stay in one place. It travels, as we found out with some of these, nuclear facilities that have had meltdowns. And yeah, yeah, it's
it's an insane notion. These
it's
are people
definitely insane.
playing such a dangerous game. And as one of the people who Judge Napolitano interviews, his name's Professor Jeffrey Sachs. He's a professor of economics. He's been involved in politics and advising governments all around the world for 30 or 40 years. He likens it to that board game Risk, where you basically
Mm,
pieces around the globe and you're basically playing, you want to have the strategic advantage in a particular area in Asia or in Europe or whatever else. And to these people, they're taking incredible risks and they don't really have concern for consequences. They're willing to destroy lives. I mean, if we look at what happened to Libya or what's happening to Syria currently, I mean, America right now is essentially funding terrorism in Syria. It's the names have changed. So at first it was Al Qaeda, and then it was ISIS, and then it was Al Nusra, and the names have changed. But this is the same type of Al Qaeda terrorism that we were fighting in Iraq, that we claimed was responsible for 9/11, 9/11 Trade Center attacks,
mm,
and now America is openly funding them, and we're
yeah.
basically saying terror organizations like this are better than the Assad government. So this is the kind of dangerous game. America is quickly losing any kind of moral high ground that they used to occupy. The rest of the world is just seeing that, wow, this is such a dirty game.
Yeah, yeah,
And
it does worry me. Yeah.
and I know that seems outside the scope of what we wanted to talk about, um, with propaganda and history and everything else. But it's important to understand that, the mindset of the people that are playing these games, they don't care about the truth. They don't care about lives. It's really about winning at any cost, no matter how,
But what are they winning? What
if
did
you,
they win?
again, strategic advantage, like Ukraine, for example, there are a lot of minerals in Ukraine. Black
Farmland?
BlackRock has huge investments in the country. They're buying up farmland in Ukraine. So mainly it comes down to money, but it's also about weakening Russia because America still wants to be the hegemon, the most dominant power on the planet. And Russia has been saying, no, this is now a multipolar world. It's not a unipolar world. There are numerous poles of influence, and we have to, acknowledge each other's interests and find a way to work together. And
Well, that
America
sounds fair.
America is essentially trying to use the love of anybody else into submission if they're not playing along. And so this is really America is acting as if it's the only bully on the playground, and they'll do whatever they have to do to not lose their position. And again, this is not these things have been happening for, I mean, it goes back to World War One, World War Two, but it's so much easier to see now. And in the past, we
Yeah.
always could hide behind we're defending democracy or we're defending peace or we're coming to the aid of our allies. Right now, it's all dirty tricks. It's all so ugly.
Yeah, but based on a lot of our other conversations here, a lot of that other stuff was hooey as well. We were coming to the aid of another country, a a country that they deliberately destroyed so that they could come in and rebuild and enslave with usury. That's been going on for a long time and longer than we knew. And now it's coming to the surface with people like you that are willing to come up here and talk about it, get it out there so people can really see what's happening. And I agree. I mean, we enjoyed being the superpower of the planet, right? But at what cost? At the cost of a lot of life and a lot of real dirty tricks. And I'm ashamed, actually, that I wasn't wise to it earlier. So,
And again, the way that propaganda spins something like this is, oh, you're anti-American, or oh, you're not patriotic, or something like this. No, American people are good and principled, and we value honesty and truth. Um, the American ideal that our founding fathers codified in the form of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, what they thought America could be. Again, George Washington warned about entangling alliances, where you have such a strong alliance to one particular country that then you get embroiled in conflicts that you really don't belong in. These
exactly.
principles were sound. So America itself doesn't have the problems. It's that what's what's taken what's taken over America is a type of a parasitic influence, like a parasite in a host, where there's a parasitic influence and a certain mindset where they don't value life, they don't value truth, they don't value principles. America doesn't even have any principles anymore. I mean, for example, funding and backing a genocide that's been going on for 14 months now. We're quick to condemn. Like one of the smears they used against Putin was that he was taking children out of Ukraine. And actually, what was happening was, and again, I'm going from memory here, and I could be a little off. It was actually completely debunked. It turned out that he was just trying to put them either in foster care or some kind of care so that they would be taken care of and get taken out of harm's way. So America was quick to
Yeah.
condemn, oh, Putin is doing this terrible thing. And yet, when we look at Israel Palestine, no problem. We'll give them whatever
Yeah.
they need. And so
Yeah.
the entire world is witnessing. You can call it what you want. You can, if you're the propagandist, you can say you're defending yourself. You can say it's not a genocide. The entire world can see what it is.
Yeah.
And and you can lie all you want, but what's happening is, by America backing these types of things, America is just losing its credibility as any kind of positive force in the world.
I
And
agree.
the reason people like myself are speaking up is you have to turn it around. We have to. Americans really need to decide. There's enough information out there. Like just Judge Napolitano and his channel and the people he's interviewing. He's interviewing this cast of 12 to 14 people weekly. Every week he does a half an hour interview with each of these people, and it's a type of information you're not going to get anything even remotely close to that on the television or the newspaper. And
Yeah.
none of the television networks would interview any of these people or give them a platform. And that's the nature of the propaganda. When you only give one side and you don't allow a debate, you don't allow the counterpoints to be presented. For example, Tucker Carlson took a tremendous amount of heat for even interviewing Putin.
He sure did. Yeah.
Why wouldn't we want to hear what the other side, if indeed, I don't even consider them the other side. They're just a country with interests of their own and people who care about their families and their communities and their loved ones. They live by Christian values. Why do we treat them like they're the other side? We don't even need to look at it that way. So can't we just listen to this man? Putin's a man. Can we listen to this man, see what he has to say? And for Putin and for Tucker to even listen to him, they acted like he was just dealing with the most evil person you've ever imagined. And then
Yeah.
just
What did you?
and then just recently, Tucker interviewed their foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov. Very careful, very precise with what everything he said. I don't see that there was anything he said in that whole interview that was factually inaccurate. And they're going to smear Tucker again for having the audacity to interview the other side.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. I mean, that's what they're doing. That's the playbook. That's basically their playbook.
And that is, but
Just
that is propaganda. When you only allow your perspective to be heard, And there is no other side. There's no legitimacy to any other side. Why do we even need to listen to them? They're just crazy. They're insane. They're bent on world domination. Those are talking points that have been presented to people, but there's no basis for that. And Russia has repeatedly said exactly what they're doing and that they want to negotiate. They want this whole conflict to end. It's someone bent on world domination that's going to take over the world. That's not the way they talk.
Yeah. Well, they could have done that a long time ago if they wanted to, but take over the world, Pinky in the Brain. I don't know if you know that cartoon.
Another reference. Pinky in the Brain, what?
Pinky in the Brain is in a cartoon about uh, two laboratory mice. One's a genius and the other one's a nut.
No,
But every night their mission was to take over the world. Sorry,
well, to bring it back, we have enough resources out there, good people, whistleblowers, that if a person doesn't know some of these names, well, unfortunately, that means you're just not trying very hard to understand any of this. So, for example, investigative journalists. There are 8 to 10 really good investigative journalists that we could name. Glenn Greenwald, Max Blumenthal, Aaron Mate, Cheryl Atkinson, former CBS news journalist, Vanessa Beeley. She was in Syria while that whole thing was happening. There are many others as well, but there's so many of these people trying to tell the stories, but you're not going to find them when you turn on your television. You have to start talking. And then and again, the litmus test that I always use is, are they acting like a propagandist, or they're really doing their best to tell the truth, to pull in all the information and say this is the way it works. And again, there are very few people that seem to be honest at this point. But once you find one, okay, keep on going back to that person and keep still scrutinize them. Because again, every once in a while someone looks like they're going to be a decent journalist and then they say something that's completely bonkers. And so
yeah.
that's why you try and find some decent resources. Judge Napolitano is a good resource. Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate and their organization, the Gray Zone, they're a good resource.
Yeah, I'm going to watch this Judging Freedom on BitChute. I'll look that up and
It's a lot of
I'll try to catch them.
very good, intelligent interviews. Again, diplomats, ambassadors, State Department officials, military people, CIA. There are 3 different CIA analysts. And the reason I
Yeah,
mentioned VIPS, Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, 8 of these people on Judge Napolitano's show are all part of that organization.
yeah,
So these are the insiders. These are the people that know how to look at information and figure out what's the stuff that you give to the public just to make them believe anything, and what's the truth on the matter. So the
yeah,
CIA analysts, they understand that the world operates very differently than the way the newspaper tells us it does. And so they're the types of people that say it's common knowledge. For example, I used Nord Stream as the example before. It's common knowledge that Russia did not blow up its own pipeline. Nobody with any intelligence in the intelligence establishment in the USA, they don't believe that.
yeah,
If they do, then they're not operating at a high level within an intelligence agency. They're a low level person who's just believing what they're told. But any of the experienced analysts, they know better.
Well, I mean, a lot of this is just common sense. I mean, that if you can't use even common sense and question things, then you really aren't trying very hard. I mean, not at all. And I don't know, maybe there's just a lack of common sense going on out there. It's just like, tell me what to believe and I'll believe it.
I mean, even when an event happens, the media tells you how to interpret that event, or how to, you know, um, like the January 6th protest. The Democrats within Congress said they did not want to release the videotapes of, the footage of inside the Capitol building. They didn't want to release it to the public because when people saw that, it might change their mind about what happened that day.
Well, there
So
was plenty of
what?
evidence on people's cell phones. There are cell phone videos out there all over the place until they collectively pulled them off. They started to bury just any of that. But I saw plenty of it long before they were able to do that. So, I mean, but it's the footage inside too. But again, people had their phones inside. And you see them walking. I said to my husband, they're walking between the red ropes. They're not even knocking things over. They're just like, oh, look at this. Oh, look at this. And then the upstarts that were infiltrated into that, or, let's just call it a planned event. Uh, I had seen a Zoom conference that got leaked where there was people from different organizations. I'm not going to name them. Uh, were telling them to go tell their people, send out letters, send out to your troublemakers, if you will. You'll know who they are. You can guess probably. And these different organizations, and tell them to dress in Trump gear. Now, there was people that actually took videos of people changing in the behind the bushes in the tree, changing out of their regular clothes and into the Trump gear, so that they could, go in and pretend that they were the Trumpers, and they're the ones that caused the chaos. And there were busloads of them. You could see the busloads of them coming in. So I guess it's like, what are you going to believe? Well, we're the news. Believe what we tell you, or believe your own eyes from video people right there on the street, right in the mix of it, took and put out there. It's just crazy to me. And talk about an injustice. Those people are still sitting in jail without a trial. Without a trial. They can't talk to their families. They can't talk to lawyers. They're just locked away in a gulag as if they have no rights. And if I remember correctly, there was a riot on January 20th uh, of 2021 when Trump came into office. So, no, 2017 when Trump came into office. They were smashing windows and rioting all through D.C. After his inauguration and all that. But that was okay. And there's people. I mean, somebody tried to blow up the Capitol building. What happened to that? I mean, that was years ago, obviously. But I don't. I'm just ranting now because it kind of makes me angry to know that all that happened and it was so covered up.
Again, to me, it's not a Democrat. To me, it's not. I don't focus on the Democrat Republican thing. To me, the injustice is that it's also dishonest, distorted. We're being told something that doesn't match with reality. So again, my
Right.
point about the cameras, the Democratic Party in Congress, they did not, or the Democratic officials in Congress did not want to release the footage to the public because if they saw some of the footage, it would change their mind about the event.
Well, right.
Uh,
And they wouldn't allow any
So,
Republicans other than rhinos.
so, and then of course, all many of the many examples you gave, we do know that Antifa was involved. Again, one of the good investigative journalists on this was Michael Shan, YLN. He's when said there are many good investigative journalists, he's one of them. He's been following Antifa for years. He knows their tactics, their hand signals, the way they dress, the way they communicate. They were there. That was part. They were part of the agitators. And then
Hmm.
we know from the different congressmen who've spoken out about January 6th because they're investigating it. They're on the committee and they're looking into all this information and they're reading all the transcripts. There's a congressman out of Louisiana. His first name is Clay. I forget his last name. I'm sorry. Tucker interviewed him. In reading over everything they have, all the evidence they have about January 6th, at this point, they know there were at least 200 FBI agents, plain clothes, not announcing that they were FBI, participating in the event for some purpose.
Hmm.
And when they asked the FBI director under oath how many were there, he said, "Well, I'm not allowed to answer that question. That's a
Yeah,
state secret." So,
exactly.
so to me, if the roles had been reversed and it was the Democrats who suffered, I would be just as upset if I saw all the dishonesty and distortion and lies and twisting things all around. And so that's, again, so many people, they get into this partisan position. And I would just say there are a lot of people that we're not tied to our partisan position. We're just looking for the truth. And if you're
Well,
willing, and
I
if you're willing
agree.
to not be so like stuck in your team, and you're willing to look at the truth, I can again, when George Bush Jr. was in office, we were willing to look at all the things he did, but we also used that same scrutiny for Obama when he came into power. And so often we see people are they're stuck in one side or the other, and then they hated Bush so much that then Obama came to office and they thought he was, this morally upright leader, and they gave him a pass. And
Yep.
he was getting high crimes in his first 6 months in office.
Yeah, I have to give you a disclaimer here. I am neither left or right. I've always been centered. I mean, I was considered myself a Democrat for a very, very long time, but I've always been more centered. I honestly can see both sides of this and and wonder why there's only two sides, but they're really the same wings of the same bird, right? Two wings of the same bird. That deep state is the bird in the middle, and it's controlling both sides. That is how I feel about this. Um, uh, and that's why we need to take that down. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with all of this, but I don't believe that I like if in conversation, I just readily tell people, I don't trust any of them on either side. You know, if they're in politics, there's no good guys anymore. I mean, it's really hard to find a good guy.
Right?
Before they get compromised right away.
Or incredible pressure is applied,
Yeah.
like Tulsi Gabbard. Uh, she seems principled. She's generally good. A lot of people like her. In terms of like a strong, female role model, I think she's just one of the best out there. She's strong, outspoken, smart. I mean, if she ran against Kamala, she would have made Kamala look like a fool. And in fact, she did. That was part of the
Mm.
animosity. Tulsi was essentially the reason that Kamala got knocked out of her first attempt at running in 2020. I believe
Yeah.
that. I think it was 2020. Um, Tulsi pointed out all Kamala's failings and everything else, and Kamala had to drop out. Even before Iowa, I believe she was the
Oh
first Democrat
yeah.
to drop out.
Yeah, it was definitely before Iowa. Yeah. Um,
And so Tulsi's
yeah.
strong. The reason I bring up Tulsi is, okay, I don't think they have blackmail material on her, but yet incredible pressure was applied, and now she's saying crazy things about how Islam is trying to spread across the world and impose Sharia law on all of us. And so Islam is the greatest threat to the West right now. Okay, first of all, Islam is a billion people on a planet of 8 billion. And Islam does not have 750 military bases all over the planet. And the radical faction within Islam, the ones we call terrorists, well, it's actually the West funding and backing them. We've got evidence of this for Libya. We've got evidence of this for Syria. We have evidence of this, currently. That's these are the dirty tricks these people play.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
And so the idea that Tulsi says something crazy like that, again, sometimes it's just when you're in that environment, you start to you realize where the power is and pressure is applied, and you have to toe the line and you have to say certain things. And it doesn't mean Tulsi was right on everything else. There were some other things she might have been wrong on. I don't know all her positions. But again, here's someone that we think is good and principled, and then she kind of screws up on that issue. And it's unfortunate.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of dirty tactics that go on, and that's why I just can't trust either side. That you just don't know what's going on behind the back in the back room. They go back there and they're all shaking hands and loving each other up. I've just seen too many weird things. I've actually seen in Congress after I think when they didn't give the vote to when Pence said he didn't. What are the words I'm looking for? He he didn't call it for Trump, right?
Oh
And
yeah,
I actually saw
stepping
them put,
in the electoral college count on January 6th, right?
yeah, yeah,
January
yeah,
26th. 2021.
2016, yeah, yeah.
No, if he didn't call,
Uh,
you're talking about 2021, January 6th, 2021. That was the day of the protest on January 6th. That's when they were hoping that Pence would step in as president of the Senate and and do something. So anyway, continue though.
okay, well, you could very clearly see when Pence turned around to walk off, they were shaking hands and everybody's like attaboys on him. And they slipped a coin in his hand and he opened his hand and looked at it. And I could see that it was a 33-degree Mason coin. I could see that. And then he's like, oh, in the pocket. And then you look out into all of the benches and envelopes are being tucked away. People are like coming up, shaking hands, giving envelopes. It's like, are they paying everybody off for their vote? What just happened here? You could see it. I I was amazed that they were so obvious about it too. It's like, what are these envelopes? Shaking hands and here's your envelope. What's in your hand? Oh, it's an envelope.
I didn't see that, but I doubt it was money because if an envelope, I mean, the idea that even if you have $100 bills, $1,000 is not enough to bribe a congressperson. It needs to be 20, 100,
Or maybe
$100,000.
it's stock options, huh?
Yeah, it would have had to been something else. So it might have been monetary in some way, but I doubt it was cash. Um,
But there are
maybe it
numerous events of it.
might have been
Like you
something.
could see.
Might have been a get out of jail free card, so something where they basically say,
Hmm.
hey, if you get in trouble in the future, you're going to be taken care of, you're going to be protected. Kind of like in the mafia, you say somebody's a made man. Okay,
Yeah,
maybe we're speculating, we don't know. If indeed what you said about, and again, I don't know this, but if indeed it was a 33rd degree coin, 33rd degree Freemason coin, an interesting piece of history that kind of ties into that. Harry Truman, when he, I'm not sure if this was in his memoirs, but at some point in his life, he said the greatest honor of his life was becoming a 33rd degree Freemason. Now, most people who were formerly a president of the United States would say the greatest honor of their life was being a president of the United States. You'd think that'd be at top of the list. For
yeah,
him, it was being 33rd degree Freemason. So there's a hierarchy, a power structure there, and Freemasonry is right at the top. Now, Freemasonry, and again, we're kind of getting, we'll switch back over because we were talking about January 6th and everything else, and Democrats and Republicans and all that. It is important to understand the role of Freemasonry. So 99% of Freemasons, it's kind of a boys' club. They get together, they dress up in kilts and do some Scottish rites. Scottish Rite Freemasonry and York Rite Freemasonry may be a little different, but it's harmless for the most part. But it does act as a vehicle for powerful men to come together. And then at a certain point, you may get tapped and they say, we actually think you'd be suited for this, or a group of us, out of the 50 men at the Freemasonic Lodge, there may be a kind of a power circle of three, four, or five individuals. And they may invite one other individual and say, we think you have some potential and we'd like you to join us in the cigar club, or we'd like to have join us for a conversation. So it becomes a vehicle where powerful people can tap or find other people and then maybe groom them for positions or pull them into their power circle. So most Freemasons know nothing, but when you do get to a high enough level, that is how many that is the high it's probably one of the highest levels of the power structure. Like if
yeah.
we look
It's like he
at
made his
the
bones.
hierarchy and we're trying to figure out who's at the top, the U.S. deep state, they're at least three or four tiers down.
Hmm.
Um, Zionism, as it relates to Israel, is at least three tiers down, two or three tiers down. But I would argue that Freemasonry is right at the top. When we look at World War One, the start of World War One was engineered by Freemasons. The start of World War Two was largely engineered by Freemasons. The outcome of World War Two was engineered by Freemasons. Harry Truman, again, being involved. I mean, Some say that he might have even been inducted as a 33rd degree Freemason as a result of his willingness to drop the atomic bomb. Now, I haven't seen that verified, but it's been suggested that there's a connection there. If we look at the 9/11 event, I won't go into all the details. I know people are going to have strong opinions about these kind of things, but there's a
Hmm.
lot of symbolism and numerology loaded within that event of 9/11, and there's certainly a Freemasonic tie. I won't go into all the details on that. So Freemasonry, um, they protect each other, and it's one of the higher levels of the power structure. Now, Freemasonry was not always that way. When we had the founding fathers, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, I think many of them were Freemasons. But
Hmm.
Freemasonry had not been infected at that point. And we use the word infection because secret societies, whether you look at, the Rosicrucians or the Knights Templar or any of these organizations, they all kind of derive from the ancient mystery schools. And so the
Right.
mystery schools go all the way back to the times of Plato and Aristotle. And we call them mystery schools because they had a more advanced understanding of how we manifest in this world, how we operate in this world, how we align our mind, our emotions, our action to get a very specific outcome in this world. And they seem to understand the laws of nature a bit better than the average layperson. And that's probably an understatement. They had a very high level of understanding. But they didn't think that that information should just be given to the public yet because the public was still relatively spiritually immature. And again, this is what they say in their own text. This is what we know from history. So they felt that they should hold on to this understanding, this higher level of knowledge until humanity was ready for the knowledge. They were acting as caretakers of a certain type of knowledge. They even had built-in mechanisms so that only honorable men and principled people could be in that position because they didn't want someone to get a hold of this information and misuse it. So Freemasonry, at a certain point, got hijacked. And if people know, and this is a piece of history, when we hear about the Illuminati, the Illuminati, people think it's a Dan Brown novel, and the Illuminati's been operating for 500 years, and men operating in shadowy, you know, quarters and having secret meetings and all those types of things. I refrain from using the word most of the time because most people are misusing it. There was an actual organization called the Illuminati, founded in 1776 by Adam Weishaupt, with the assistance of Jacob Frank, a self-proclaimed messiah, and with Rothschild funding. And so at least those three individuals were all involved. That organization, rather than creating its own network, their plan was, oh, and by the way, the evidence of this is in a book called Proofs of a Conspiracy, and the author's name is John Robison, Robison. Proofs of a Conspiracy. This is an older book. And it tells the story about the founding of the organization, and their plan was to infiltrate the existing Freemasonic orders, because Freemasonry had been around, but it was generally an honorable organization. And it had aristocrats and kings and bankers and academics and things like that. So this Illuminati group, their idea was that it will infiltrate the existing order and then put our ideas into the mix. And so, and the thing about this Illuminati group was they largely subscribed to this concept, the left hand concept, the left hand of God. And so this derived from a mystic from the 17th century. His name was Sabbatai Zevi, also pronounced Sabbatai Zvi, Z-V-I, sometimes a Z-E-V-I, sometimes a Z-V-I, Sabbatai Zevi. He basically was following Kabbalah, and he was a bit of a conjurer and a sorcerer type of person. Could do some tricks, manifestations, things like this. And he was studying the Lurian Kabbalah. I said Lurian, Luria, Luriah. I think that's right. I could be a little off. The author of that Kabbalah was Simon Luria. So he studied that Kabbalah, and his teaching, his understanding that he came away with from studying Kabbalah was most of us know the right hand of God, good works and compassion and miracles and charity and blessings and all the wonderful things in life, love and beauty and all of these things. but we still see the hard parts about life, war and famine and hardship and tragedy. And so Zevi argued that there's a right hand of God, but then there's also the left hand of God. God dispenses all those things. Now, many would argue that that's not God dispensing war. Man does that through the misuse of the free will that he was given by God. But Zevi argued, no, God dispenses war. And so if God has a left hand and a right hand, Zevi argued that the highest spiritual understanding is that you can also be the left. You as a human can also act as the left hand of God. You can be deception and evil and murder and intrigue. And there's no judgment on it because it's all God, right hand, left hand. So you can be the left hand too. That was their spiritual teaching. And Zevi then ordered his followers, prove that you believe these teachings and do things that you think are morally repugnant, things that you think you couldn't do. And you'll find that you won't get struck by a bolt of lightning. You won't burn in hell forever. You'll be just fine. And so what happened was you had a group of people who now thought it was okay to engage in evil. And because they didn't get struck down by a bolt of lightning, apparently God's okay with it. Now, of course, you having to be at peace within your own self, to live by your conscience, to live by your own goodness, this is a whole theological argument. But because in a worldly way, God didn't do something to them and punish them immediately in that moment, they kind of think, okay, well, we get to play God then. And apparently God doesn't have an opinion about us doing whatever we want to do. So that was the mindset within this Illuminati group. That was what they brought into Freemasonry. And then Freemasonry did indeed get hijacked, where the rituals started to change and they started to do things that were openly dishonest or evil or deceptive or that would cause a war. And this is how they started to operate. And again, these organizations, in the 1700s up until that point, were largely good men. They weren't engaged in dark things. But now, causing World War I, World War II, and what looks like World War III, most of this is, Freemasonic plans. There's a letter, you might have heard of this one before. It was in a London museum at a point. Now, people have argued that this is not a real letter, and they get pulled from the museum. So it's tough to verify this one. But it was a letter between Albert Pike, the head of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, one of the most well-known Freemasons in American history, and Giuseppe Mazzini, an Italian Freemason. And they wrote a letter back and forth. It was basically an outline this was 1871. It was an outline for 3 wars that would lead to Freemasonic dominance over the world. And they basically outlined World War I and what would be the causes of this First World War. They outlined the causes of a Second World War. And then they outlined the causes of a Third World War. And the Third World War would be the worst of all of them. And out of that, humanity would be the religion would be the basis of it. So Christians and Zionists versus Muslims. And it would be so horrific that finally, in the end, everyone would abandon their religions and come to the belief that religions are the cause of suffering and wars, and therefore we need to abandon religion and we need to find the true light, the Freemasonic light of Lucifer.
Mm.
Now, if the document is not authentic, this 1871 document, it is interesting that they're very specific in, first of all, even these 2 Freemasons speaking back and forth. And we knew about this document as early as, or at least people were talking about this document as early as 2001. I heard about it. And people might have been talking about it in the 1990s. So here we are, right on the verge of a world war, and it's happening almost exactly according to the document. So whether or not the document is authentic, somehow, even if it's a fraudulent document, even if someone just made this up and this was just internet disinformation, someone's following it. The way that document describes the situation and what we see playing out now, it does fit. So it doesn't mean that the document has to be authentic, but it does mean that someone is following these types of plans and for a particular purpose.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm glad you brought that up. It's kind of interesting. I mean, when you were describing the left and the right hand of God, It's like, okay, well, you're not being punished for being bad, but honestly, God doesn't exactly like give us rewards for being good either. It's like what I don't, have gold coming down from the sky for me, or things just happen to show up and appear in my life. I still have to work on that. But so it's interesting that they would juxtapose those things in that way, right? It's like, well, God doesn't punish if you do something bad, so it must be the left hand. Let's go with that. It's like, well, God doesn't reward you either. I mean, I think your reward's supposed to be at the end when you get to heaven.
Well, but also the reward of living a good life.
Well, yeah,
I mean,
yeah, I know.
doing something good makes you feel good. If
It
if
sure
you
does.
if you help a person in need, if you extend a helping hand, if you know, I mean, even just a bird, like you find a bird with a broken wing and you just want to take care of that bird and give that bird love, it makes us feel so good to do something like that. It connects us. It connects us to the spark of God that's within each of us. And
Exactly.
this whole idea that either there's reward or there's punishment, and if we don't see either of these outwardly in a very obvious way, that God doesn't have an opinion about any of it. No, certain ways of living connect us, and certain ways
It's
of
a
living
heart.
disconnect us. And
Yeah.
so there was a Dutch banker named Ronald Bernard, and he told the story of how he was kind of being pulled into these powerful circles. And what they told him is, if you can leave your conscience at the door, or I think another way they put it is, if you put your conscience in a freezer, if you can leave your conscience in a freezer and play our game, there'll be unlimited power for you, worldly power, worldly treasures, things like this. But that was the
Hmm.
requirement. He had to cut himself off from whatever that thing is in him that would want him to do right or good or be honorable. So you're cutting yourself off from the part of us that is most oriented, that spark of goodness. Why most people want to experience love and goodness, and and again, many people would argue that that's the access to God living through us.
Yeah. Thank you. I agree with that.
And again, there are many.
Definitely.
That's kind of a crude argument, but there are many arguments along these lines that could be made, that we do these things because something inside of us, we know right and wrong. Something inside of us
Oh,
knows
yeah.
we do something bad, we hurt a person. There's something inside of us, we know that it's wrong.
It's empathy.
Like
Yes.
the idea that, like, for example, killing a child universally across the planet, with a few notable exceptions currently. Everybody else in the world thinks that you do not kill children. There's nothing in you, and if you're connected, if you're in your heart, the idea that an adult could use a weapon of some kind and look a 4-year-old in the eyes and kill a child.
Yeah.
It's so against our nature.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what the book says. It doesn't matter what the Old Testament says. It doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. There's something in us that knows that that's wrong. And so this this
Yeah.
idea this idea that because of whatever your beliefs are, you throw out the rules of right and wrong, and you think you can do anything because there's no immediate punishment, and then you even delight in it. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, again, I don't. Sorry, I'm not trying to get dark, but we need to understand that that is how some of these people are operating currently. They
Yeah.
they they delight in doing evil. It's a little sadistic. It's a little sick.
Well,
Should we
my
end on a
dog just came running in.
should we end on a cheerier note than that?
We should, yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, we've been talking almost 2 hours
Okay.
going
Wow.
on. I think
We
we
went
started
long.
like 10 after 1 or something, or
Okay.
no, 10 after 12.
Um, well, okay. This isn't exactly cheery, but it's not quite as heavy. Um, regarding what we see playing out now, this is all quite serious because these characters are going for broke. It's a power game, and there's a very good chance they're going to escalate things worse and turn things into some kind of a massive conflict. I would say that the forces of chaos are fully at work, destabilizing everything. And so much of what we're seeing, it's not happening accidentally. This is when
I agree.
you corner an animal or corner an individual and they think that they're going to be either killed or caught or imprisoned, they'll use any means at their disposal. They'll do anything.
Hmm.
And I guess I'm actually quite uplifted by watching someone like Sergei Lavrov in this Tucker interview being reasonable and measured, not angry, not crazy.
Hmm.
And the fact that we have those things available to us, it's a great time for the public to just decide, okay, are we going to wake up a little bit to what's going on? Can we finally accept that we're being lied to on a scale we've never seen before? And can we wake up? And there are a lot of people out there that they realize that things are not right. So I consider it very promising that so many people are waking up in little ways every day.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I guess that is a cheerier note. So, because I really can't believe that we can continue to go so far off the path of goodness and not find some way to retreat back and get back squarely on that path. I really have in my heart that we can do that. So, with that, I'm going to thank you, and I'm going to sign us out. And hey, we've got a part 3 coming up, so we've got lots more to talk about. So I'm just going to say thanks for being here, Michael, and thanks for checking in with Real People. We'll see you next time. Bye
Okay,
now.
thanks, Effie. Bye.